In the heart of the Colorado desert stands a fortress built not to reform, but to contain evil itself, a place so secure that no one has ever escaped, and no one truly leaves the same. They call it the Alcatraz of the Rockies, but to the men who live behind its concrete walls, it's something far worse, a tomb for the living. Cut to archival footage, razor wire, steel gates closing, and inmates' eyes behind a slot. This is ADX Florence, the most extreme federal prison in America, where terrorists, spies, serial killers, and gang leaders vanish into 7 by 12-foot concrete boxes, 23 hours a day, alone. But inside these walls, there are secrets the government doesn't want you to know, from mysterious deaths to experiments in total isolation to inmates who swear the walls whisper back. Tonight, we step inside America's toughest prison, not as guards, not as inmates, but as witnesses to a world that was never meant to be seen. Before we step through the gates of ADX Florence, do me a favor, hit like, share this story, and subscribe for more real-life crime documentaries just like this one. Every click helps us uncover the hidden worlds that were never meant to be seen. Now, let's enter America's toughest prison, the fortress in the desert. From above, ADX Florence looks like a cross carved into the desert, each wing pointing toward isolation. Surrounded by layers of fences, motion sensors, and gun towers, it was designed for one purpose: to make escape impossible. Completed in 1994, the prison was America's answer to chaos, a response to the violence of the federal system. Supermax, the word itself promised safety, but what it really created was silence. Over 490 inmates live here, each in a soundproof cell made of poured concrete. They eat alone, exercise alone, sleep alone. For many, the only human voice they hear belongs to a guard behind bulletproof glass. Even the air they breathe is controlled. Every whisper is recorded, every movement tracked. Inside ADX, you don't just lose your freedom, you lose your identity. An inmate once described it like this: you feel yourself fading, day by day, until you start wondering if you still exist. But to understand why ADX was built, we need to go back to the chaos that forced the government to create a prison unlike any other, the birth of the Supermax. Before ADX Florence became a name whispered by inmates across the country, the federal prison system was in chaos. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, violence was spiraling out of control. Inmates attacked officers. Gang wars erupted behind bars. One riot at the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, left 2 guards dead, both stabbed within hours of each other. The government responded with a new idea: control units, places where the most dangerous prisoners could be isolated completely, cut off from others, from the outside world, even from themselves. By 1994, the plan was approved. Construction began in the remote Colorado desert. Cost, $60 million. Purpose, to house the worst of the worst. They called it the United States Penitentiary, Administrative Maximum Facility, ADX Florence. It would be a place where escape was not just unlikely, but unthinkable. Every inch was engineered for control. Hallways angled to block sight lines. Doors that open only when others close. A system so tight, an inmate could never see another inmate without permission. When it opened in 1994, journalists weren't invited. Officials called it a necessary evil. Human rights advocates called it something else: the end of human contact. But for the first men who arrived at ADX, no one could prepare them for what was waiting inside. The psychology of isolation. Inside ADX, time does not move, it dissolves. Days blur into nights, weeks into months. Inmates see the same walls, hear the same hum, breathe the same recycled air. For most, contact with another human being is reduced to a glimpse of gloved hands, sliding a tray through a metal slot. Psychologists call it environmental deprivation. No sunlight, no touch, no conversation. The mind, stripped of stimulation, starts to eat itself. Studies show that after just 30 days of total isolation, the human brain begins to change. Memory falters, emotions flatten, Hallucinations appear. But at ADX, this isn't 30 days. It's years. Some inmates have spent more than 2 decades inside these boxes. One prisoner, held in solitary for over 15 years, described it as a slow-motion execution of the mind. He would count cracks on the wall, trace the sound of distant doors, and talk to his reflection until he forgot what real conversation felt like. The Bureau of Prisons insists ADX is humane, that inmates have books, a radio, an hour of exercise. But those who've lived it tell a different story. Inmate, you start to feel the walls closing in, not physically, but in your head. The silence is louder than any scream. For some, the isolation becomes a form of self-destruction. Inmates slash themselves open with razor fragments, swallow batteries, or smear messages on the walls in blood. Others simply vanish into their minds, existing somewhere between consciousness and insanity. ADX Florence was never built to rehabilitate. It was built to contain. But the question remains, what happens to a man when you erase everything that makes him human? The residents of hell. If ADX Florence is a fortress, then its inmates are its ghosts, locked away unseen and unforgettable. Here, the names read like a roll call of infamy. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, the mathematical genius who waged war on modern technology with homemade bombs, killing 3 and injuring 23. Ramzi Youssef, the mastermind behind the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. He once said he wished to kill 250,000 Americans. At ADX, he spends 23 hours a day staring at a concrete wall. Terry Nichols, the accomplice of Timothy McVeigh in the Oklahoma City bombing. His role in the death of 168 people earned him a life without parole, in a place where every minute feels like punishment. Zacharias Moussaoui, the so-called 20th hijacker of 9/11. He prays alone, eats alone, dreams alone. The desert wind is the only thing that answers. Richard Reed, the British shoe bomber. Jakar Tsarnaev, the Boston Marathon bomber. Robert Hansen, the FBI agent who sold secrets to the Soviets. Even the infamous drug lord El Chapo spent his last days here, locked away in total isolation, denied sunlight, denied sleep, denied everything that once made him untouchable. They say ADX doesn't just hold America's enemies. It absorbs them, erases them, until all that's left is silence and memory. A former warden once described the facility as a cleaner version of hell. Guards call it the pit. Inmates call it the box within a box. And yet, for all its control, even ADX cannot suppress what lies beneath. Fear, rage, and desperation. Because when men have nothing left to lose, they start to fight ghosts, and sometimes the ghosts fight back. The day the walls talked. For years, ADX Florence stood as the perfect machine, silent, controlled, unbreakable. But in a place designed to crush rebellion, even silence has a breaking point. It started with the whispers. Inmates talking through ventilation shafts, learning to communicate in code, tapping messages through pipes, scratching notes under meal trays. Despite 23-hour lockdowns, human instinct found a way to connect. And where communication grows, so does conspiracy. In 2005, the illusion of total control cracked. A series of violent outbursts rocked the Supermax. Homemade weapons, fire set with smuggled matches, an officer slashed across the face. The Bureau of Prisons tried to contain the story, but word leaked out. Letters smuggled by inmates described blood on the walls and guards who refused to enter certain units after dark. In one chilling account, an inmate wrote, "You can hear them at night, men laughing in the dark, even when no one's awake. The walls, they talk back." Psychologists later concluded that extreme isolation was driving inmates to psychosis, auditory hallucinations, paranoia, violent impulses. But some guards had their own theories. They said the prison itself had absorbed too much suffering, that ADX had become haunted by the echoes of men who had lost their minds inside it. Between 2000 and 2010, dozens of suicide attempts were recorded. At least 6 were successful. One inmate, Richard Lee McNair, a notorious escape artist, reportedly told another prisoner to the vent, "This place is not made for the living. It's a slow death." After a string of incidents, the Bureau quietly increased psychological evaluations, but the damage was already done. The myth of invincibility was over. ADX wasn't just a prison anymore. It was a living experiment in human endurance. And at its center was a truth no one in power wanted to admit. The same system that was built to keep America safe was slowly destroying the men inside it and the people guarding them. The guard's burden. Inside ADX Florence, the inmates aren't the only ones serving a sentence. The guards, the men and women in uniform, live by the same rhythm of isolation, 12-hour shifts, endless silence, the hum of steel doors, and the ever-present feeling that one mistake could mean death. They call it the wait. It's what you feel when you walk into control unit, knowing that every step you take is being watched, every sound magnified by concrete walls. Officers train for months before they're even allowed inside. They learn to walk with purpose, to never turn their back, to speak only when necessary. Even the sound of keys can make an inmate snap. But what breaks most guards isn't the danger, it's the silence. A former officer described it like this: you leave work, but the quiet follows you home. You start checking your locks 3 times. You stop talking to people. You forget what normal feels like. Suicides among correctional staff across the federal system have risen sharply in recent years. At ADX, counselors say the symptoms mirror those of combat veterans: anxiety, insomnia, hypervigilance. The psychological toll is so heavy that some officers transfer after just 1 year. Others stay, trapped by the same invisible chains that bind the men they watch. They start to rationalize it, that they're keeping monsters locked away. But deep down, most of them know monsters aren't born here. They're made here. Behind every locked door, there's a man who used to laugh, who used to dream, who used to matter. And behind every door they guard, a piece of the guard's humanity fades with it. Inside ADX Florence, there are no heroes, just survivors, the ones who never left. Some men at ADX Florence aren't serving sentences. They're serving lifetimes. There's a difference. A sentence ends. A lifetime just fades. Over the years, hundreds of prisoners have passed through these corridors, but a few, the permanents, have been here since the very beginning. Among them was Thomas Silverstein, a name that still echoes in prison lore. A leader of the Aryan Brotherhood, convicted of killing a guard at Marion Penitentiary in 1983. He spent more than 36 years in continuous solitary confinement, longer than any prisoner in U.S. history. For decades, Silverstein lived without human contact, eating, sleeping, and breathing inside a concrete tomb. He once wrote in a letter, "I feel buried alive. I haven't seen the stars in decades. The silence is like water filling my lungs." When he finally died in 2019, the Bureau of Prisons didn't issue a statement. There was no ceremony, no mention of his name, just another number erased from the system. Others remain, men like Robert P. Hansen, the FBI double agent who betrayed his country for over 20 years, and Ramzi Youssef, still confined to the same isolation unit that breaks most men within months. These inmates have become ghosts of a forgotten experiment, proof that you can keep a body alive long after the mind has disappeared. A former psychologist at ADX once said, "The real punishment here isn't the walls. It's time. Time is what kills you. Some will die here. Others already have. But whether by execution, suicide, or sheer erosion of will, ADX Florence always wins. Because once you enter this place, you don't leave. Not really. Not ever. The human cost. Behind every cell at ADX Florence, there's a ripple, a wave of pain that spreads far beyond the razor wire. On the outside, families wait. Wives, mothers, children, clutching photographs that stopped aging years ago. They send letters that take weeks to arrive, if they arrive at all. Some are returned unopened, stamped, correspondence restricted. For them, ADX isn't a facility. It's a void, a black hole that swallows communication, affection, hope. Woman, he's not dead, but he's not living either. I just don't know what to pray for anymore. The Bureau of Prisons calls it administrative segregation. Lawyers and human rights advocates call it what it is: psychological torture. In 2012, a group of inmates filed a class action lawsuit against the U.S. government, alleging cruel and unusual punishment. The case, Cunningham versus Federal Bureau of Prisons, revealed haunting details. Men with schizophrenia locked alone for years. Inmates screaming through the night, begging for medication that never came. One prisoner, diagnosed with severe mental illness, tore at his own flesh for attention. Another blinded himself after months of sensory deprivation. Guards walked past. The screams became part of the soundtrack. Under public pressure, the Bureau agreed to reforms: more mental health staff, better monitoring, access to treatment. But for many, it was too late. The damage had already sunk deep. Even the lawyers who entered ADX for visits described leaving changed. One said, "You can feel the despair cling to your clothes when you walk out." But beyond the walls, the debate raged on. Is absolute isolation ever justified? Can a nation that calls itself free build a place designed to erase humanity? For the families of victims, ADX offers closure. For the families of inmates, it offers endless mourning. And for America, it poses a question we still haven't answered. How far are we willing to go in the name of safety? The escape myth. Every prison has an escape story, a legend whispered in the yard, passed cell to cell like contraband hope. But at ADX Florence, escape isn't just difficult. It's impossible. No one has ever made it out alive. Not one. From the air, ADX looks more like a missile silo than a penitentiary. The walls are reinforced concrete, 12 inches thick. The fences are electrified. The ground itself is embedded with motion sensors and seismic detectors that can pick up the vibration of a single footstep. Even the architecture is designed to confuse. Corridors bend at odd angles to block line of sight. Cells face inward, away from the sun. There are no shadows to hide in, no corners unguarded. Still, humans are stubborn creatures. And even here, imagination found a way to rebel. In 1998, an inmate named Richard Lee McNair, a notorious escape artist, studied ADX from afar while held elsewhere. He called it the place where dreams go to die. Years later, when rumors spread that he might be transferred there, he said, "If I end up in Florence, just bury me first." Other inmates, desperate to defy the myth, plotted impossible escapes. Tunnels through concrete, hijacked delivery trucks, coded messages carved into soap bars. None succeeded. Every plan ended the same way, in lockdown, isolation, or death. The last real attempt came in the early 2000s. An inmate in the control unit tried to tamper with his restraints during a routine move. It lasted less than a minute. He never saw the outside again. ADX's security isn't just physical, it's psychological. Inmates are conditioned to know there's nowhere to go, nowhere to run, no horizon, no escape, not even in your dreams. And so the legend of escape became something else, not a dream of freedom, but a test of will. How long can a man keep his mind alive when his body is already buried? At ADX Florence, the only escape is the one no one speaks of, the escape through madness or death. The experiment's in silence. Some say ADX Florence is more than a prison. They call it a laboratory, not for science, but for control. Over the years, whispers have surfaced. Stories from guards, former inmates, and even contractors about strange experiments conducted within its walls. Officially, they don't exist, but the accounts are too detailed, too consistent to ignore. In 2007, a former psychologist who worked at ADX anonymously told a Denver reporter that the facility was being used to study the effects of total isolation on long-term behavior. The government denied it, of course, but the data she mentioned, biometric logs, brainwave tracking, behavior reports, matched the kind of metrics used in clinical research. The psychologist claimed inmates were observed under constant surveillance, with their reactions to sensory deprivation cataloged daily. She described inmates who began hallucinating entire conversations. One man swore he heard a woman singing lullabies through the vents. Another spoke to his younger self in the reflection of the stainless steel toilet. Whether sanctioned or not, ADX became a natural experiment in human psychology. What happens when you strip away every external stimulus, when you isolate the human mind until it turns on itself? In the early 2010s, leaked reports described a secretive section within the prison known among staff as the Deep Unit. Inmates here allegedly faced even stricter conditions: zero personal property, no contact with lawyers, lights that never turn off. One anonymous guard described it as the place you send men when you want to erase them without killing them. He said the silence there was so total, you could hear your own heartbeat echo off the walls. The Bureau of Prisons denies all of it: the experiments, the Deep Unit, the psychological tracking. But former inmate stories tell another truth. Some can't stand silence even years after release. Some wake up screaming from dreams where the walls whisper their names. The whistleblowers and the cover-up. For decades, ADX Florence existed beyond question, a monument to control, sealed behind security clearances and desert silence. But in the 2010s, the cracks began to show. It started with leaks, letters from guards, reports from psychologists, fragments of memos never meant to be seen, all whispering the same thing. Something inside ADX had gone too far. Investigative reporters from The Nation and the New York Times began connecting dots. Unexplained inmate deaths, falsified incident reports, missing footage from security archives. Every request for comment came back with the same phrase: national security concerns. One whistleblower, a former correctional officer identified only as RL, claimed he saw guards turning off cameras before certain interventions. He said prisoners were left in restraint chairs for hours, sometimes overnight. His report was buried. He was reassigned. Soon after, psychologists began speaking out too. One, Dr. Ellen Hart, testified anonymously to Congress, describing ADX as a psychological pressure cooker disguised as a prison. She claimed mental health evaluations were faked to meet quotas, and suicides were mislabeled as medical incidents. But inside the Bureau, silence reigned. Staff who questioned the system found themselves isolated, demoted, or quietly transferred. The same tactics used on inmates were now being used on employees who spoke up. Journalists who tried to film near the facility found themselves shadowed by unmarked vehicles. One reporter's footage was mysteriously erased after a supposed technical malfunction. Another received anonymous emails warning her to drop the Florence story before you disappear into it. Still, fragments of truth leaked through. A leaked internal memo referenced controlled psychological observation units, a phrase never found in Public Bureau of Prisons documentation. Another, dated 2015, mentioned behavioral modification through environmental control. No official ever confirmed what those phrases meant. But for those who walked ADX's corridors, the meaning was clear. It wasn't just a prison. It was an experiment in obedience. When Congress finally demanded an internal review, the Bureau released a heavily redacted report. It concluded that ADX operated within constitutional boundaries. The whistleblowers? Discredited. Their careers erased. One of them left a single note for the journalist who first printed his story. It read, "Truth doesn't escape from Florence. It gets buried here." ADX Florence was built to contain violence, but what it really captured was the soul of everyone who entered it. Inside those walls, time stops. Names fade. Men vanish into the hum of the ventilation and the rhythm of their own heartbeat. Some deserved to be there. Others were simply forgotten. But all of them, inmates, guards, and ghosts alike, are bound by the same silence. We call it justice. But if you listen closely, beneath the noise of politics and punishment, you might hear something else, a question echoing from the concrete. How much of your humanity would you trade to feel safe? Thank you for watching. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit like, share, and subscribe. It helps us shine a light into the places the world was never meant to see.